No, that's not. Hello. Here we go. I always wanted to swing it like, no, it's she's doing it all. A one girl show.
I need to share the screen.
You can do that. Hello, hello. Good evening. We'd like to get started in a minute or so. Just like in church, there's plenty of seats up front.
How you know?
Some things never change. All right. Welcome to the 1916 lecture series. We have a monthly lecture here at the Cayley Club, the first Friday of every month. I just want to start off tonight by making a few announcements, and then I'll introduce the speaker. We're very excited about our speaker tonight. And when the program is over, there'll be questions and answers, and I will give more information about some of the upcoming events, okay? Everyone sees that there are flyers on the tables and on the chairs, and this is a fundraiser that the 1916 committee is having on November 18th, a Saturday evening, and it's a concert by a band known as Eibhlin the Band. And what we're doing is we are trying to lend our support network to bring people in to hear this band and to raise money for the Cayley Club. The Cayley Club is a vital source of Irish influence here on this side of the bay, and it's we have an obligation to support them. There wouldn't be a 1916 committee without the Cayley Club for these lectures and for all the other things that we have done here. So we'd like everyone to try to take a flyer home, try to think about coming, and you can buy a ticket from some of the people, Kathy Greenwell especially, Marie McGee, and downstairs in the pub. It's $10 for the ticket. And it's good if you buy a ticket and maybe you can't come because it's still, the money's going to the right place. But on the other hand, this is a very good band. It'll be a great night, 4 hours of music, traditional Irish and rebel music. And these guys are very talented. I certainly hope everyone can come to it. You're going to leave on a real good high that night. So try to keep that in mind.
Can I get a card before I come?
You usually are, Jim. So the next thing is then we have a meeting, the 1916 committee. We have regular meetings planning our activities. The next one is going to be on Tuesday, November 21st at Patrick's Pub, 7 p.m. Everybody is welcome to come. We discuss things that we want to do. We have a lecture planned for December, but we don't have in January, but we're going to look forward to the spring. And anybody that has any ideas about topics you'd like to hear about, come to the meeting, bring it up, and we'll see what we can do about it. December 1st is our next lecture. Okay, that's the first Friday in December. And we're going to have a night of Irish American culture. Later on, after the lecture is over, I'll go into more detail about exactly how that is going to shape out. It'll be a different kind of night, and it should be a lot of fun. But right now, we're very happy to have a guest lecturer here. And this is a guest speaker who comes from Galway. That's an island. But she's here. She flew in last night from North Carolina, where she is teaching Irish at Davidson Davie Community College. She came in last night up in Boston, and we ended up at Patrick's Pub, and a bunch of people that are here had a chance to speak with Eibhlin. I'm not going to go into the last name. And it's a very interesting and fun girl, and we're going to enjoy it tonight. But one thing that I learned last night that I didn't know until last night, that she is here teaching on a Fulbright scholarship. Now, I don't know that I ever met a Fulbright scholar before, but when I was in college and Porky back there, we were not so bright scholars, is how they described us. Where's Ralph Fortune? He should be here too. But anyway, she is a very, very interesting person. She is a real lover and student of the Irish language. Tonight, she will speak on her passion about the Irish language, and also highlight of the presentation, which you can see is a PowerPoint presentation, which she knows how to run all by herself and is probably going to go on without a hitch, which we're always glad about. She wrote, a paper in her undergraduate days at Queen's University, Belfast, and she'll get into the details about that. But the title of the thesis paper was Women Republican Prisoners and Their Connection with the Irish Language and Feminism. There'll be questions and answers after, and then I'll come back to sum up the night, okay? So please, a warm welcome here. Is there something? Watch this.
Hi, everyone. So as Jim was saying there, I will be talking about the women Republican prisoners and their connection with the Irish language. But I wanted to give a kind of brief history of the Irish language before this and kind of up to this date, just for anyone who is kind of unfamiliar with the language or whatever. And I'm screen sharing. I'm screen sharing. Perfect. So
Yeah.
do I need to? I can hold it actually. That might work better. When I was younger, when I made my communion, I was like the loudest child in the church, and I didn't even need the microphone. So, but anyways, so the Irish language is a Celtic language, and it's in the same kind of branch of Celtic languages as Manx Gaelic and Scottish Gaelic would be. So it's closely related to both of them. And when we look at how the language is spoken, what it sounds like, and even sort of how it's written, when you look at Irish and Scots Gaelic, they are similar. And now in the Celtic languages, there's also another branch, and these languages, we can see Breton, Welsh and Cornish. They wouldn't be as similar to the Irish language as Gaelic and Manx would be. So for Irish, you can either call it Irish and English, but Irish when you're talking about it in English, but you'll hear people say Gaelgat, Gaelin or Gaelic. So people in the real south of Ireland will say Gaelin, people in kind of the west and middle of Ireland will say Gaelgat, and then if you're in the north, you'll say Gaelic. And the Irish language is an official language of Ireland, and it's compulsory to take up until the end of secondary school or high school if you're in the south of Ireland. Now, it's available in schools in the north, but not every single school, and it isn't compulsory. So Irish was first seen in Ogham, which this is just a little image of what Ogham is, but it's a rock, a large stone with inscriptions in it, little notches, and each notch is a different set of letters or a different letter. So Irish was first seen in Ogham. It is one of the oldest and historical languages in the world, and it has some borrowed words from different periods, for example, from Scandinavian periods or Anglo-Norman period. And the Anglo-Normans settled in Ireland, the Brits settled in Ireland in the 12th century, and they had tried to bring English to Ireland initially, and this first attempt didn't work. And that first attempt failed, and eventually by the 16th century the Normans were speaking in Irish. Now that, as we know, didn't last, but from the 1200s to the 1600s was the period of classical modern Irish. This isn't what the normal everyday person spoke. It was kind of a cultivated standard for school scholars and poets. But the everyday language that the modern Irish person spoke was early modern Irish. So if you were going to school and studying or writing a poem or writing a paper, you would write it in classical modern Irish. But what people would speak was early modern Irish. And Irish was what most of the people in the island spoke at this time, but English was unfortunately needed for legal affairs. And if you were going to court, or if you were buying something, or I don't know, paying for something, you needed English. And therefore, Irish didn't become the administrative language of the country, and the status of Irish as a major language was lost. And now Irish did continue as the language of the greater part of the rural community, but it never had the status of a major language, sorry. And then once the penal laws were relaxed, there was even further hit to the Irish language, because the more prosperous Irish person began to learn English, as there was more jobs available, and you had to do all your legal affairs in English. People who kind of wanted more of this life, the more prosperous Irish person began to speak English and adopt a more anglicised way of life. This increased during and after the famine, and then after the famine, the Irish language was basically extinct. It was on the verge of extinction. So during the famine, as we know, 1 million Irish people died, and a further 1 million people emigrated. Most of these people were Irish speakers. We see here just a wee look at the different levels of monoglot speakers at different years. And a monoglot speaker is someone who can only speak that language. So in the beginning of the 1800s, there was 800,000 monoglot Irish speakers. So these people could only speak Irish, and there was obviously more people who had both English and Irish, but these were the people who only had Irish. And then the end of the famine, 50 years later, this number had gone from 800,000 to 320,000. So that is over half of the people were gone. And then in 1911, just over 100 years later, there was under 17,000 monoglot speakers. So this is not a natural decline. This is obviously very unnatural, and it's from the influence of the English. And then in the 18th century, some scholars did take a kind of interest in Irish, and although it was on the verge of extinction, people were kind of more interested in it. People were looking at the rules and everything. And Thomas Davis was one of those in 1843, who declared the Irish as a national language of Ireland. And then the Society for Preservation of the Irish Language in 1876 gained recognition for the Irish language at every level of school. So this was a kind of massive thing, because you were then able to learn it in school, and it was some level of recognition at least. But the Irish was still in decline. And then in 1893, Conradh na Gaeilge was established, and Conradh na Gaeilge would be the biggest kind of organisation to protect and promote the Irish language in Ireland. So it's just celebrating its 130th birthday, is it, this year? So they're doing a bit of a celebration. But a couple of years after this, after Conradh na Gaeilge was established, mass movement and interest in the Irish language kind of grew. And then a start was made to bringing grammar standards in line with spoken modern Irish. Oh, did I go back? Sorry about that. So a start was made to bringing grammar standards in line with spoken modern Irish. And then in the 1940s, the language spellings were changed and made easier. So this was kind of, in a way, very detrimental to the people who were already speaking in Irish. The reason they chose to make a lot of the spellings easier was to encourage more people to learn the language. But for the people who had been speaking Irish their whole life, they then had to relearn what they had already known. And to them, this was a bit of a kick in the teeth, because it did invite more people to learn Irish, but it was as if the people doing this were not caring at all for the people who were actually already speaking Irish. So this did cause backlash, and people also felt that it was a loss of identity. And the spelling change forced, obviously, people to relearn. And then in 1958, the Irish government published the official standard. So this is still kind of the standard we would use now. Obviously, some of it has changed, but that would be what we would use. And then in 2003, the Official Languages Act was signed for the Republic of Ireland. And this provided legislative protection for the Irish language in public services, signage, ads, announcements. So now if you're in the south of Ireland and you're going on a train, the destinations are all in English and in Irish, or road signs all in English and in Irish, but you'll see Irish everywhere that's needed. Now, this doesn't mean that they always do it correctly. I was actually saying yesterday that they had a road sign and it was saying go right in English, and it said take ceart in Irish, which means go correct. So they got the wrong right. And there's so many examples of this. So they can often be a little bit lazy when it comes to doing them, which is really frustrating. But anyways, and then in 2007, Irish was recognised as official working language for the European Union. Now, this is amazing because the amount of jobs that this provided for people, because they obviously needed to translate all these documentation. And even now, you'd be studying Irish and people would be like, oh, are you going to go work in the European Union? And so it did open up a big kind of area for jobs in the European Union. And then in 2022, so last year, and this was after much lobbying and much protesting, the official Irish Language Act was signed in the north of Ireland. And this was brilliant because it finally provided legislative protection for all of these speakers and who use the Irish in the north. And now it isn't perfect, the act, but it's there, which is far better. Now, a Gaeltacht area is an area where most of the people there will have Irish as their first language. And although you may think that's kind of where most of the Irish speakers are, based on studies, it's actually the future of the Irish language is actually more in urban areas where people are learning Irish through Gael schools, which are Irish language schools. And so this is kind of where the future of the Irish language is in these studies. And now we're going to get on to what I'm really excited to talk about. So this is what I did my undergraduate research on. And I have done this kind of same talk in different places, and I get I get a little bit nervous beforehand, but then when I actually get into it, I'm like, I love talking about this. And as Jim was saying, if anyone has any questions, just maybe jot them down and either I'll answer it as I continue speaking or you can ask me afterwards. But to give a little bit of background first, and I'm sure most of you already know all this, but I'll just give a little bit of background. So the Troubles was a conflict in the north of Ireland and it lasted over 30 years. Irish people were fighting for the end of British rule in Ireland, and the Troubles started in 1969 and ended in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement. The Troubles was fueled by many historical events of British rule in Ireland. It was a conflict between Catholic nationalists and Protestant unionists, but it was not a religious war. The English presence in Ireland began in the 12th century with the Norman invasion. And this, as you can see, was 800 years of British rule to some degree. It was altering degrees, but to some level, there was British involvement in Ireland. And then in 1916, there was a rebellion for Irish freedom, which led to most of the island gaining independence. But as we know, the North did not gain independence. And the way that the British had done this is they got as much land as possible to ensure what they thought would be a forever unionist majority vote. And now, as we know, that didn't quite work. It's now voting is more towards nationalists, but they took as much land as possible to ensure that the people there would always be on their side. And because of this, the people of the North felt quite abandoned by the people of the South because they hadn't put sort of enough effort into continuing to fight for unity and continuing to fight for the North. So the nationalist people were kind of disregarded by the people of the South. And so I go to the one. And then during the Troubles, gerrymandering ensured that there was a unionist result in every election, and Catholics had little voting rights. And the Royal Ulster Constabulary, or the RUC, was the police force at the time in the North, and they were very brutal towards Catholics. Catholics faced much sectarianism and were just not treated very well at all. And Irish republicanism, as we know, is a movement towards the unity and independence of Ireland under a republic. And Irish Republicans view British rule in any part of Ireland as inherently illegitimate. And then in 1969, there was a campaign to end this discrimination of Catholics, of the Catholic minority. And then because of that, British troops were deployed in the north. And this is what many people agree was the beginning of the Troubles. And then in 1971, the British government introduced mass arrest and internment without trial. So this is where they would arrest people and wouldn't even give them a trial, and they would just lock them up. And in this initial sweep that they did, they arrested 342 men and imprisoned them all without a trial. And then on Bloody Sunday, in January 1972, the people of the Bogside in Derry were marching peacefully against this internment without a trial. And the British Army shot 26 unarmed civilians, killing 13 of them on sight, and one died later because of their injuries. So this was obviously a very, very brutal attack on Irish people. And many of these people were also shot while they were trying to escape or help other wounded people. And because of the Troubles, 3,500 people were killed, and 52% of these people were civilians. Now, the Troubles ended in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, but there is obviously still quite a lot of effects still visible and still kind of palpable in the North today. And to give just a brief background on myself, and I know many of you probably attend a lot of these lectures, but in January, my dad, Eibhlin Nic Cormaic, or Gino McCormick, gave a presentation on his new book. It was on the blanket he was giving. Yes, so he did that over Zoom. So my dad, Eibhlin Nic Cormaic, spent 15 years in prison during the Troubles. And that's sort of where I grew up hearing about stories about people in prison, and the kind of, he had ensured that we had a strong sense of the importance of the Irish language instilled in us, and he had kind of ensured that there would be Gaelscoils, Irish language schools around us that we could attend and all this. So we had a very strong sense of the importance of the Irish language from him. And I recently graduated from Queen's University in Belfast with an undergraduate degree in Irish. I say recently, it was 2 years ago, but anyway. And we were brought up bilingually, and my mum spoke to us in English and my dad in Irish. Even now, if I was ringing him, I would never speak to him in English. And sometimes when we're at an event or something that's through English and people are talking to him, I'm standing there and I'm like, I don't know if I meant to speak in English to him, because it feels uncomfortable to speak in English to him. And so when I was picking my dissertation topic, I knew that I had wanted to study the Irish language in prison. But I did find that when I was doing a lot of this research and a lot of kind of reading on the topic, there was very little written on the women's experience, which is kind of similar in a lot of things, but this kind of made me sad. And it interested me, and I wanted to hear their side of the story. I wanted to hear how they had learned Irish, and the different struggles that they may have faced while learning, because there was obviously quite a lot done on the men. And then there are many different works that kind of discuss this similar topic that what I wanted to study. But again, I found that a lot of them lacked women's involvement. And to look at two different kind of perspectives, we have Margaret Ward, who added a new chapter to her book recently, and her book is Unmanageable Revolutionaries, and this is women's involvement in nationalist movement throughout history in Ireland. But she added recently a chapter on Northern women, and her chapter was very, very amazing, and I had actually used quite a lot of her work for my dissertation. And then afterwards, I got invited to speak about my dissertation, and she was on the same panel with me, and I was very starstruck. But anyway, and then Fergal McConrochty is also very worth noticing, and very worth mentioning, and he writes a lot about the language aspect of prison life. So he has focused very heavily on how the men in the prison learn Irish and what kind of importance it has had for them. But it is lacking the women's experience. And also in recent years, there has been a rise in autobiographies on this topic, my dad included. And even then, a lot of these works were focused on the men's experience. And lacked information on the women. And I also found that although many of these people who had been in prison had really connected with the Irish language and had felt such strong sense of identity when learning the language, there was a distinct lack of information on the Irish language. So I felt that there was a lack of information on the Irish language and a lack of information on the women, and there was a lack of information on the women learning the Irish language. So it was important for me to kind of study this, and to study the topic properly, I needed to actually talk to the women who were involved. So this led me on to my research, and I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to hear how they had learned Irish, what kind of things were important to them, what difficulties they may have faced, and the importance that the language had held for them in prison. So I interviewed 5 different women who had been in prison in either Maghaberry or Armagh during the Troubles. So you see here, there's a little map of where Maghaberry and Armagh is, the 2 little dots. And some of them were in both prisons when Armagh shut down. Some of them were moved to Maghaberry. Some of them were in twice. Some of them were in for a short time. Some of them were in for longer. So I wanted to see kind of their experiences with the Irish language before prison, during prison, and also after prison. And their answers were all amazing. And that was definitely my favorite part of my research, was interviewing them and kind of seeing their stories. And this is just a wee look at when the women's sentences began and when they got out. And some of the women wanted to stay anonymous, but then 2 of them are named. So Breach Brownlee and Rosaleen McCorley, and I'll be talking a bit more about them throughout this presentation. And then here is a wee look at which prisons they were in. So some in Armagh, some in Maghaberry, and some in both. And then here's just a little look at a map of the prison. And then the 3 main areas that I wanted to research when I was doing my dissertation were to investigate the connections between feminism and the Republican women prisoners. So I wanted to see what their kind of relationship was. I wanted to see what kind of relationship these Republican women had with the Irish language. And then I wanted to see whether there was any connection between feminism and the Irish language, and whether these women believed there to be or not. And I found out very quickly that it's a very complicated and strange relationship between feminism and Republican women, and more so at the time, but still to this day, it was a very kind of complicated and tense time. And a lot of these women, although they would have had very strong feminist ideals and beliefs, they would not identify themselves as feminists. So historian Laura Jacobson explains this, and she says that feminist critics at the time believed that Republican women were manipulated by their male counterparts to participate in a movement that did not recognise sexual equity. And then historian Fiona McCann further goes on to explain that the participation of Irish Republican women in the arms struggle within the military ranks of the IRA was at the time, and to a large extent still is, deemed incompatible with the demands of feminism. So this kind of attitude from feminists led to a complicated relationship between the 2. And because of this, Republican women felt quite abandoned and disregarded by the feminist women at the time. And they believed that they had kind of disregarded their struggles. And because of this, a lot of Republican women did not and still wouldn't identify themselves as feminists. And Breach Brownlee, we see the complicated relationship between the 2 groups when we look at the time that Margaretta D'Arcy spent in prison. So Margaretta D'Arcy was a feminist activist, and she had spent some time in prison. And her attitude towards the prison experience was very, very different towards the women's attitude, women who were also in prison. And you see kind of the different attitudes and the different experiences or outlook on feminism from those 2 examples. And then Breach Brownlee, one of the women who I interviewed, has this quote, and I'll just go through a bit of it, but she says that feminism for Republicans has always been a difficulty. She says that she wouldn't identify herself as a feminist. She would more so identify herself as a Republican. She goes on to explain that the only three labels she would accept is that she's Irish, she's a woman, and she's a Republican. So not feminist. And Rhiannon Talbot goes on as well to explain that with feminism and republicanism, that it was actually quite a late development within Republicans, even for the women. And Nell McCafferty wrote in 1980, appealing for support for the Armagh women. And she said that it is my belief that Armagh is a feminist issue. While she was explaining and writing in the same article, she writes that there is menstrual blood on the walls of Armagh prison. So this is her appealing to people that this is a feminist issue. And Laura Jacobson, historian Laura Jacobson, explains that what many non-Republicans did not understand was that the Armagh women, as representatives of Republican women both in and out of prison, were feminists. So although there was a complicated relationship between the two groups, when we look at it, the issue, or not the issue, but the struggle that these women faced was inherently feminist, even if they did not want to accept that as a label. So there is substantial difference in the amount of material on the male prisoners compared to the women. And we see this in many areas of history. Women's contributions are often forgotten or disregarded. And this is also very evident when we look at works on the Troubles. There is far, far more information available on the men's experience. And as I discussed, there is a complicated relationship between republicanism and feminism. And when I asked these women whether they believed that this lack of information was down to gender or not, there were differing opinions. Some of the women believed that this was due to gender, in the lack of information, whereas some of the women believed that it was now down to numbers. And in the H blocks at any one point, there was hundreds and hundreds of men, but at the highest point in Armagh prison, there was only 40 women. So there were far less women. So some of these women believed that it was due to numbers, whereas some people believed it was due to gender. And maybe it was kind of a mix of both, in my opinion. And so during the interviews, the women all described the importance of the Irish language while they were in prison. The Irish language has had a very, very important place in a long history of nationalist prisoners. Many people have learnt it while imprisoned and used it kind of as a language of communication and everything. And the Irish language is a huge part of Irish identity, and all of these women mentioned that they had a certain need to learn it while they were in prison. They connected it with their heritage and their culture and their identity. And even though a lot of the women, even at the time while they were in prison, weren't fully fluent, they had used as much Irish as they possibly could and did put a lot of effort into learning. And learning Irish also provided these women with a way to keep their minds active. It was something that could occupy their mind, and it was a thing for Republican prisoners to use their time in prison wisely. And as one of the women put it, it wasn't a thing for them to go up and put their feet up. They used this time to educate themselves. And for a lot of the people, learning the Irish language was a way to educate themselves. Also, because the Irish language was what many nationalist people used and spoke, the prison authority, or the screws, did not have any interest in learning the Irish language at all. They were they hated it. They didn't want to learn it. They punished people for using it. So they then, because they could not speak the Irish language, it became very effective as a secret means of communication for these women. They could say stuff without the prison authority knowing what they meant or what they were talking about. And Breach Brownlee explains that the prison screws, or the authority, had so much that they could use against these women, but the Irish language was the one thing that they could use against the prison authority. They could kind of fight it back. And for a lot of the women, the opportunity that they had to learn Irish while they were in prison was the first proper opportunity that they were given. So you'll see here that in primary school, 60% of the women had some sort of opportunity, and in secondary school or high school, 40% of the women had some opportunity. But this opportunity was only a couple of fuckle. It was only a couple of words that they could learn, and it was just wee phrases. They weren't ever taught something substantial. So because of this, the opportunity that they had to learn Irish in prison was the first proper opportunity that they had. And to give a little example of what kind of level they were at, one of the women, Eibhlin Nic Cormaic, she had done Irish up until her GCSEs. And because of this, she was the most fluent speaker in the prison, and she was deemed the teacher. She adopted this role of teacher. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the school system, GCSE is when you're about 14, 15, you're pretty young. So she was the teacher for the prison with only a level of age 13, 14, 15 level of Irish. So that's the kind of level these people were at. And the women also spoke of Mairead Farrell, who had been imprisoned with the earlier women, and she had adopted also the role of teacher for some time. And the women explained that Mairead Farrell had actually had the opportunity to go to the Gaeltacht when she was younger. And the Gaeltacht, as I mentioned earlier, is where people use Irish as their first language, and it's a higher density of people using and speaking Irish every day. And children will go to the Gaeltacht on summer camps to learn Irish. So Mairead Farrell had had the opportunity to spend time in the Gaeltacht. And for many of these women, they said that this was kind of like a magical, mystical place for them. They had had no chance of going to the Gaeltacht. So none of them had had any proper opportunity. And this is just a look at some of the Gaeltacht areas in Irish. So Mairead Farrell probably would have gone to one in Donegal rather than Galway, people will attend summer camps there, and you might go on an immersion course. But for these women, that was kind of unheard of. So it was amazing that someone had that opportunity. And then there were a couple of different ways in which these women learnt Irish, and the two most common ways were from each other and from hired-in teachers. And this is really what I wanted to focus on and study on when I was doing this. I wanted to see kind of what structure their classes had, how they had actually learnt Irish. And it should be fine. I only have 7 slides left. Should be fine. So, and if it dies, I'll just charge it. And when the women were on remand, or maybe should I plug it in because the Zoom is on this? Should I plug it in? Sorry, guys. It's in my bag. 2 seconds.
We need a 12-year-old.
I got it over here.
Sorry about this.
Is that going to reach over here? Okay. It's always fun. You need this?
Oh yes, I do. Sorry about this, everyone.
Don't worry about it.
Let's get that Zoom up.
Okay. Woohoo! So the two main ways that they had to learn Irish was either. Oh yes, sorry about that. The two main ways that they had to learn Irish was either from each other or from hired-in teachers. And there were advantages and disadvantages to both systems. So when the women were on remand, and this was prior to being sentenced, they fought for an Irish teacher. And they got a teacher in, and his name was Sean O'Boyle. And from the women's accounts, they really did love him. He came weekly and he was very, very patient with them. But then once these women were sentenced, that was the end of that, and they weren't able to get these classes again. So this was only prior to being sentenced. And then after that, the responsibility to learn Irish fell on themselves. And because of this, a sort of pyramid was formed, where the person at the top would have the highest level of Irish, in this case, maybe Mairead Farrell or Rosaleen McCorley, and they would teach a couple of people. And once these people were at a certain level, they would teach a couple of people. So everyone would be simultaneously learning and teaching all at the same time. And as you can imagine, with this way, if someone makes a mistake up here, it is going to filter down. So soon everyone is going to be learning and this wrong mistake and saying and repeating this mistake. So as you can imagine, there is disadvantages to that system. But then again, in later years, when the women were in Maghaberry, they also had formal education again. So there was a couple of different times that there was teachers. And the advantages to having a teacher is that they would have material available that the women could only dream of. And they would be at a certain level of fluency that the women were not at. So they could teach whatever they wanted. But on the other hand, the women knew exactly what they needed to teach. The women knew what words and vocabulary were necessary for prison life, whereas sometimes these teachers missed the mark and they would teach things that just weren't necessary for these women. So there are disadvantages and advantages to both systems. And also, it would also be quite a lot of work on the women who were providing the classes for other people. It would be a lot of extra material. And it was funny when I was going through these classes, those of the women who were never the full proper teacher kind of were very pro peer-led classes, whereas those who maybe had to run the class were a bit more like, no, I liked when the teachers were in. So they had differing opinions on this matter. And the women also sometimes learnt from the male prisoners, and quite a lot of men were imprisoned in the H-box at the time. And as you can imagine, some of them would have been completing also their GCSEs or their A-levels. So sometimes they would be able to get resources from the male prison. But the Irish language material coming in and out of prison often faced stricter censorship. So material in Irish coming in, the women would get it and it would be covered or covered up where the Irish was. And it was labelled, the Irish language was labelled as a tool by prison authority because they could not understand it. And therefore, anything coming in faced stricter checks. And anything that was in Irish then, by the time the women got it, would have blacked out marks. So it was useless. Or it would take longer and longer for it to actually come through because they were checking what it meant. And Brownlee, one of the women, describes receiving a letter from a friend. And by the time it arrived to her, she just had a black page. That's all she got, basically. And then McCorley, who described to me having people send her letters and have her people send her material in later years, she would translate a copy of the daily newspaper Law, which means day, every day. But by the time she would get it, it would be in the evening. She was meant to get this in the morning, but there would be such long delays on her receiving this newspaper. So as you can see, sometimes stuff in Irish would get through, but letters leaving and coming in and material leaving and coming in would face far stricter checks and censorship rules than its English counterpart. So many of the women had a decent level enough when they were in prison. And although they wouldn't have been fully fluent, they had enough to communicate with each other. But unfortunately, many of the women are not fluent anymore at all, and they wouldn't really use much Irish in their day-to-day lives. Out of the 5 interviews that I did, only one of them was in Irish. So this, Rosaleen McCorley would use Irish every day, and then one of them would use Irish every now and then. And the other three people would use it very rarely, or just a couple of fuckle. They'd be like, oh, hi, like Jay Marta or something like that, rather than actually having a conversation in Irish. And a lot of the women, though, all of them, sorry, actually do fully see the importance of the Irish language in regards to identity still. And when we look at the women who had children, all of their children went through at least some level of Irish medium schools. So we see the importance that they held for the Irish language, even if it wasn't for themselves, or it was for themselves, but even if they couldn't relearn the language themselves, they ensured that their children had some level of Irish. So we see how important they believed the Irish language was. And then when we look then at feminism and the Irish language, we see that Siobhan Kilfeather, a author, writes that the Irish language is an important feminist issue, as is the future of all minority languages. And she goes on to say that while all European countries are multilingual, Ireland has bilingualism more deeply inscribed into theories of national identity than some other nations. And that the Irish language is an important feminist issue, as is the fate of all minority languages. And minority languages are often mother tongues, primarily used in the home rather than the public sphere, and their position in society may be understood as analogous to the position of women. And women's voices are often disregarded, and the voices of Irish language speakers are often disregarded as well. And because of this, there is a definite connection, in my opinion anyway, between the two. And then Moira Ní Anrachán goes on to further explain this, saying that there are important parallels between the position of women and the position of the Irish language in contemporary Irish society. Women are marginalised within the dominant male tradition, and the Irish language is marginalised within the dominant English language tradition. But as I said, there is a complicated relationship between republicanism and feminism, and some of the women recognized that there was a connection between the Irish language and feminism, and they recognized that these problems may be connected and that these struggling groups must support each other. But some of the other women, however, did not see a direct connection between feminism and the Irish language, but more so saw a connection between nationalism and the Irish language. And to do just a little bit, I'm actually very much considering doing a master's on this same topic, a research master's. And some of the other areas that I would like to study when I do this is to look at more of the women who are imprisoned, maybe in Limerick or in England, or even more who are in Maghaberry or in Armagh. I want to also interview maybe the staff of the prisons to get their opinion, some of the teachers that they may have had, and also some of the Protestant women prisoners to get their opinion on the Irish language. So that's kind of my plans on what to do in the future. But that is me for that presentation. I hope you guys all enjoyed that. And you guys are welcome to ask questions, by the way, and I'll try answer it to the best of my ability. Yeah.
Follow your
Can get
one of the fun rider show.
Oh, you took. Who my food?
So anyway, I just was saying that I teach a little class here at the club, but it almost seems like it would be interesting to organize a retreat out of the Belfast for women, or for whoever,
Yes.
you know, be interested, just to kind of rekindle.
Yeah, 100%. And when I was talking to them, I was even like offering, I was like, I'll teach you, because I could see that they wanted to learn, but when they have learning a language can be so tough and you have to put in so much effort. So for a lot of them, they didn't have time, or they didn't have like, they didn't really just have time in their day, but that would be good and it would be amazing for them. Mm-hmm.
Were the women you went to a political person?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you think the same sort of thing that happened in the United States has happened there with them as far as feminism, that the word was politicized, and instead of just talking about equal rights and, you know what I mean, the treatment of women, in a male-dominated society that it became, again, a dirty word.
100%.
Call yourself a feminist.
And I think it may be slightly different, but because of the kind of attitudes of some feminists, they didn't want to accept themselves as a feminist, even though when you look at their beliefs, it would very much be a feminist belief. But I think for them, they just don't want to even go near the word. Some of them, not all of them.
I have a kind of a general question. You mentioned something about the fact that many of the individuals in the North who maybe historically hadn't been, were feeling a little warmer toward Ireland in the last some maybe 10 or 15 years or so. In the event that there was a referendum in the north of Ireland to join the Republic, let's say this coming spring.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but how do you feel, or how are there polls or any kind of stuff like that to determine what that outcome might possibly be?
I think, but maybe this is maybe being a bit hopeful, but I do think it would be more in favour for a united Ireland. But there would be, if there was even mention of that poll, there would be a lot of backlash from people who obviously would not identify themselves as Irish. So it would be a very tricky one to kind of go about, and I'm definitely for a united Ireland, but it would be a tricky one because there would be all these people who would feel very, very passionately against it and would maybe be a bit aggressive towards the idea.
Has there ever been anything like that?
Any opinion poll?
Any referendum like that?
Don't think so.
No.
Don't think so.
Is it something that's allowed in the design of the government in Northern?
Well, the government in the north of Ireland is just, for lack of a better word, shit. It takes many non-functional, so I don't even know if they can function enough to go about bringing about a referendum at the moment.
I don't think that the government is permitted to. I think that falls within the Good Friday Agreement and what's written into the Good Friday Agreement. And until such time as the British government deem it a possibility, I think that's what's holding everything back. I might be wrong, but
no, that sounds right.
You mentioned 2 other prisons. Which were those other 2? One.
So I mentioned the H box, which was where the men would have been, and then I mentioned Armagh and McGabry. Is that, or did I mention Limerick and England?
Limerick was,
yes.
I think. Now you plan on doing some research in Limerick or
so I'm not positive.
Limerick is down in the
yes.
part of Ireland.
Now there was some people.
How is the treatment of the prisoners there? Is it any different than it is other women?
Yeah, it was more so to do with women who had maybe been imprisoned during the Troubles, but elsewhere other than in the north, because there would be some people who maybe whatever they were being imprisoned for happened either in the south or in England, and that's who I'd be. But there wasn't, I don't think there would have been very, very many people. It's just when I was looking into this research, that's kind of where I was thinking for extra people that I could interview. Those people.
Thanks for coming up and talking to us. You did a wonderful
problem. Thank you.
how difficult is the language to learn? I mean, what's the alphabet like? What is it?
So, I mean, because I grew up speaking Irish, I didn't have to like learn it in the same way. But I'm teaching Irish currently, and I've been teaching Irish for a couple of years, and people do find it difficult. When we look at learning English, say, the tricky thing about English is the phonetics. Like every OUGH sound makes a different sound. But the tricky thing with Irish is both the grammar and the fact that most people are learning are coming from an English perspective. So they're going to read the words how they might read an English word. And that can be a tricky barrier to get over. And with Irish as well, once you've got past the initial area of pronouncing the words correctly, you have got a whole mountain of grammar. The grammar in Irish, there's a lot more kind of fiddly grammar in Irish than there would be in English. That's kind of like, but that isn't to scare you. I think it's a great language to learn, and I think that in recent years there's been a lot of people learning on Duolingo, and I don't know like how efficient Duolingo is. It's very much like little phrases and stuff, but to get a grasp of sounds and to get a grasp of the first beginners level, Duolingo is definitely good. Yeah.
Recently, Duolingo in Irish has gone over to AI.
Oh,
So they changed from a native speaker from
interesting. I didn't know that.
in draw
Mm.
to male speaker that drops. It's like it's also kind of the sound production problem.
Mm.
So I just quit it,
Okay,
and it's also in a.
I'll stop advising Duolingo.
It's also in a Pythonic.
Yes.
So, which is, it's not a bad thing to learn it,
Yeah.
but that's mostly a written stat.
Yeah, and it's
I don't
tricky.
believe in a spoken standard.
Yeah.
Now, you have to choose one of the different areas of Ireland where it's spoken as a community language. That's how it should be learned.
And it can be frustrating as well for people learning on Duolingo, because the only thing it will give you is in the standard, so that would be like Connacht Irish, but it'll accept answers from Munster Irish or Ulster Irish, but it won't give you them. It won't give you the kind of like how to say it with Ulster grammar or Munster grammar, which is quite frustrating as well.
Since Armagh prison closed, like, how did you find these women?
I had a lot of help from my dad. I was in a very lucky position in that way, and he had been quite friendly with a lot of them. He knew many of them, and he just kind of gave me their numbers, and I was like, "Hi, it's Gino's daughter." So I think maybe if I was someone else coming from it, it may have been more difficult to even broach the topic, but it was actually very easy for me to get in contact with them.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's not full. Okay, that was wonderful, as we expected it to be.
Thank you.
Just to sum up, end up here with a reminder about some of our upcoming events. And again, to make people aware of the importance of this club here. One thing that is going to be enjoyable for those of you who might be interested in something like this, at the club on Sunday, November 12th, the New England Patriots are playing some other team in Germany. And the game starts at 9:30 a.m. And the club is going to open up at 8:30 a.m., serve an Irish breakfast, and you can watch the game downstairs in the pub. It'll be $20 a ticket. It'll be a great feed.
You doing a mailing out on that?
We're doing a mailing out on this. And from what I understand, Mr. James Riley, head of the Meat Cutters Union.
I'm sorry. That's my thing.
That's you. He's going to provide the ham that day. Okay, so that's something there are no tickets available tonight. There'll be tickets available next Friday night. There'll be tickets available at the door, and that'll be a great morning at the club here. Again, the 1916 committee will be meeting on November 21st at Patrick's Pub at 7 o'clock. All are welcome to come and participate and learn what we're doing. And yes, Marie.
We send it out on Zoom as well. In gyms, when we do those meetings, we Zoom.
All right, you can zoom in on those and talk to the people at the meeting. And then just again, the Island, the band on November 18th, a Sunday. Please buy your tickets tonight. I mean, a Saturday. Saturday, 6:30 to 10:30, so you're home relatively early. And that'll be a real great night. And then coming up, our next lecture is December 1st. And that's the Friday night, the first Friday in December. And I'm just going to read a description of what you can expect. And this will be a change of pace for us and that we're usually doing things like we did tonight, hearing about political prisoners and republicanism, nationalism, and the oppression of the British. But we're going to emphasize Irish culture as opposed to Irish history or politics on December 1st. And this event is being organized by Mary Lee Partington, Kevin Doyle, and Kathy Greenwell. So you know this is going to be a great night of entertainment and information. Here is the description that we were given for this night. You're going to have to fill in some blanks here. Titled, For the Joy of It, a Rhode Island Irish Cultural Conversation. The 1916 committee is proud to present a Rhode Island Irish panel and moderated presentation offering a cultural conversation about all things Irish in the Ocean State. Join us for a joyous evening devoted to perspectives on Irish American culture here in Rhode Island. The, quote, biggest little state is tied for third place among the 50 states in the 2020 census for a significant percent of people of Irish heritage. The moderator and panelists will comment, offer insights, share untold stories, along with demonstrations and artifacts covering a joy-filled range of topics: the arts, including music, song, and dance, Irish organizations and language, food and beverages, faith and fun, home and holidays, and more. Discover our cherished traditions and reflect on their maintenance and survival for the joy of it. So I think most people here know who wrote that. And you can really expect a fun night, and put it down, save that date, December 1st, and it'll be really, really great. Just one last thing, if you could indulge me. Yeah. Did your father learn Irish in prison? Yeah. Okay. So this is a story that deserves to be told over and over again. These hundreds of prisoners learned the Irish language in prison for all the reasons that she described, and the fact that they could sabotage the prison authorities by speaking a language that they didn't know. These hundreds of people, most of them had no background in Irish until they were incarcerated. And so it's a really remarkable story. And I do want to say a few things about her father, okay? Myself and Nancy were in Ireland this summer, my wife Nancy here, and we had a chance to stop and meet Gino under very, very funny circumstances. But anyway, we had a chat with him, and we found out that his daughter was in North Carolina, and we said, we got to get this together. And here she is, and it's a wonderful thing. Now, Gino, gave us a lecture, and he has 2 books, okay? And this is a copy of one that I bought. If anybody wants to borrow it, and get it back to me, please ask me. It's an incredible read on the blanket, an A to Z of prison resistance. And it discusses the 15 years he spent in prison, 5 of them naked in the H blocks on the blanket protest, the no wash protest, fighting back against the conditions that he was under. And he lived to write this book. It is inspirational. He has another book, The Pen Behind the Wire. Some of you old timers remember the song, The Men Behind the Wire. And this is a book of poems that Gino wrote. And if somebody could buy this if you're interested. And Gino also wrote the poem, Easter 1982, that Sheila read when we dedicated the monument to the hunger strikers. And it was a power. Yes, I didn't want to try to say it. Yeah.
That's an honor to give to
Yeah, and it was a beautiful job. So that was a moving part of that whole thing. And so that's just to say something, about Gino. And one last thing, okay, before we go downstairs, Eibhlin will be down there and everyone can ask a question to find out a little bit more about her background and what she's doing in North Carolina. And let's hope she comes back after she gets the master's and updates us on this, right? But everybody here, I'm sure, is aware of the tragedy that's going on in the Middle East. And a lot can be said about it. But Gino wrote a poem. He is a poet, and he wrote a poem. I spoke to him, I emailed him back and forth. He gave me permission to read it tonight. I'd like to share this with you. It's an Irish Republican, an Irish nationalist, his perspective on what's going on in the Middle East. And as background, I think we should all know that Irish people know what it's like to have your country occupied. They know what it's like to be marginalized, and they know what it's like to be imprisoned. This is the poem. Never was a Jesus needed more in Palestine than now. Some miracle man to call out the Pharisees and show the lame how to walk, the deaf to hear, the blind to see, and with some loaves and fishes, feed 500,000 fleeing refugees. Some temple-wrecking angry Jesus, risen from the tomb, explaining that suffer little children was not a call to bomb schools, services, hospitals, shelters, roads, and homes, with tanks, missiles, phosphorus, the air thick with drones. Explain again the meaning of those beatitudes. Stand on a mount near Raha and plain talk, no platitudes. Be a Christ of justice who to Zion will not bow. That's the type of Jesus that Palestine needs now. So that's powerful stuff. And this girl comes from good stock. I hope everybody enjoyed it. We'll all be heading downstairs. Sean Connell will be playing down there. And like I said, people can have a chance to talk. Oh, the raffle. Oh, my God. Yeah, okay. So this raffle is equally important in terms of us being able to pay for the musician downstairs. So please, it's $5 for a bunch of tickets, and there's some great prizes there. And if anybody has a VHS player at home, load up on number 5 back there, because we got VCR tapes there, right? Okay, hey, this is great. A nice crowd tonight. Let's go downstairs, support the club, and I hope we see you on November 18th, right? Very good. You could have expanded on so much. That was really, you know, but you did a lot to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Yep, all right. I just wanted to tell you how wonderful that was. Oh my goodness, I tried to learn the Irish language, but I was unsuccessful. It's tough. You did a great job. Very nice. Thank you, Jim.
We'll see you next time.